Welcome to Plot Twist Radio, the show where creativity, storytelling, and the unpredictable path of the creative life all collide. I'm your host, Erin Egnatz. Welcome back to Plot Twist Radio, the show where we talk to storytellers about the moments that bend time, memory, and meaning. Today's guest is someone whose work asks a deceptively simple question. What happens when you really go back and look again? My guest is Amy Weinland Daughters, the award-winning author of Dear Dana and the hilarious heartfelt novel You Cannot Mess This Up. In this book, Amy sends her protagonist, at 46 years old, back to 1978, where she's forced to spend 36 hours in her childhood home with her nuclear family, including her 10-year-old self. What follows is funny, uncomfortable, nostalgic, and quietly profound. It's a story about memory, family, jealousy, cigarettes, and the realization that our life stories may not be universally important, but they are profoundly important to us. Amy is a writer who blends humor with emotional truth in a way that sneaks up on you. And today we're talking about time travel, memories, writing personal stories without apology, and what happens when you finally let yourself believe that your story matters. So settle in, because this conversation might not change the past, but it just might change how you remember it. Amy, hi, how are you?
Good, Aaron. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Right. Well, I am a native Houstonian, and we've moved a lot, but we're back in the Houston area again. I have two sons who are both out of the house now, and I am a freelance writer, an author. I wrote about college football for a long time, and that's about it. I'm a wife and a mother and a writer.
Very cool. So you're in Houston. I haven't been there in a few years, but I love it. Every time I go down there, it's so nice. It seems like it grows every time I go back.
Oh my gosh, it's huge. We keep moving back and forth, and I grew up here, and I swear every time we move back, I'm like, oh my gosh, where did that freeway come from, and where does it go?
Yes, that's exactly what I noticed. I think it was like 2 years in between, visits, and I was shocked. I completely was backwards on everything just in 2
Right.
years, but I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. It is a growing, community.
yes, for sure, but a very nice one, and probably a lot warmer than it is up here in Chicago.
Oh, absolutely, but we're afraid of the cold. It gets to, like, 49 here, and people lose their minds. You know, they but my mother's 86, she's like, "Oh my god, it's 49." I'm like, "Mom, I don't like winter." And I was like, "This is not actually winter." We lived in Ohio for 12 years. I was like, "Yeah." So
Yeah, that's winter. Alright, so your novel that I read this one over the weekend, You Cannot Mess This Up. It literally sends the protagonist back in her own childhood for 36 hours. Before we get into the craft of it, where did the first spark of this idea come from?
well, literally, I had so to back it up, I have a business degree and I was in purchasing for like 15 to 20 years. And then my husband's job said, "Do you want to move to the UK for 3 years?" And we were like, "That's interesting. Let's do that." And so when I got over there and put my kid in the village school, I was like, wait a second. When I had paused my career and I was like, There's a lot of hours in this day. Like, what am I going to do?" And so I'd always written on the side. And so at first I went and took some history classes at a university and I found that very interesting, but it did not fill all the hours in this long day. And so almost out of desperation, I started to write. And the first thing I kind of gained traction on was the football writing after the freelance writing. And then that made me take myself seriously enough to say, I have this book idea that I've had forever. Because what I want to do is write myself back in time to my own childhood and write this like hilarious back in time book. So that's where the idea started. So it was about gaining confidence. But then when I realized when I started writing that book, I was like, hold on, wait a second. If I'm going to revisit my childhood as an adult, it's going to be like feelings.com. And so it turned out to be I was not planned to be a catharsis, but it absolutely turned out to be a catharsis.
Yeah, I could see that. I've always found time travel so intriguing. I'm a historian, so if I could go backwards, I wanna do it. I don't wanna go forward, but backwards would be cool. So I'm always intrigued by stories that have time travel in it. I've noticed when I first got into publishing that a lot of people were like, the agents would turn down time travel immediately, and
Right.
I'm like, "Why?" That's such an interesting concept, and now I'm so happy to see that these books are out there because I just love it. It adds, like, a different layer to it, I guess.
Right. And I love I'm I'm not a history professional, but history is, that's one of my hobbies, I guess you would say, but I'm kind of obsessed with it. And that's part of my obsession with time travel. And I think we have some things in common because I have a metal detector. I am obsessed with like connecting with the past. But I did not know as a someone who was not trained as an author or writer that time travel is very nichey and to it's hard to get into that. I did not know that. I've read so many time travel books. I've watched so many time travel movies, but it's funny because it's hard because it's a niche that's hard to fit into because it could be science fiction, it could be women's fiction, it could be all kinds of things. So it's a hard sell because it's like 2 things at once.
Yes, yes, it definitely is, but I just anytime I see a successful one like that, I get so excited because I love it, and it's hilarious. It's hilarious, but it's also quietly devastating in a way. Did you always know that the story would be funny, or did the humor emerge as, like, a survival mechanism?
Well, it was always gonna be funny, but that is a great observation. It was always gonna be funny because I think I'm funny, and that was part of the purpose of writing the book was to crack people up. Because I always say that'd be my greatest compliment if someone, like, spit out their coffee on a bus somewhere while reading it. But I realized in writing it because it turned out to be so emotional, and you calling it quietly devastating, I'm gonna write that down and really think about it for a long time. I think that's a compliment, and it's also, very thought provoking. But I did find that the way I used the humor in the book was absolutely as a survival technique, because one of the things I like the best about the book is there'll be something very relatable and something not profound, but something really worthy of deep thought. And then I'll zing in with a humorous comment. And I think that's my personality. And I think that's on wild display in this book because I had to cope with what I was writing. And to do that, that's where I use the humor, I feel like most effectively, probably.
Absolutely, and they play off each other because the whole it's hard as a writer to get those emotions to the reader, you're feeling it, but when you put it into words, sometimes it doesn't commute, but I think you did a perfect job. You lay both emotions perfectly, they play off of each other, and it makes it such a in-depth, interesting read, so I really like that one a lot.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. One of the most striking ideas in books is that the memory isn't fixed, especially this particular book. It depends on, who's remembering, of course, when it comes to writing. But when did you first realize that your own memories might be maybe unreliable or incomplete in some aspects?
Right, and it was right away when I started because the book is basically a memoir wrapped up in the tortilla of fiction time travel,
Mhm.
and so right away as I began addressing my memories, I realized as to write me seeing them as a full adult with 2 kids and a life, I was like, "Wait a second, that may not be exactly what happened." And at first I was really hard on myself on the 10-year-old version of myself. I was like, "Wait a second, she didn't handle any of this correctly." And then as I went on, I was like, "Wait a second, she just did the best she could." Everyone in that story did the best they could. My 40-something-year-old mother was just trying to survive the '70s. She did the best she could. 10-year-old Amy, my younger self, did the best she could, and she remembered it as she should remember it as a 10-year-old, but that doesn't mean that my memories would have pivoted as seeing them as an adult. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from the book is you immediately put yourself in the shoes of big Amy and little Amy and be like, wait a second, if I visited this again, I would see it differently because our memories are just based on our perspective of who we are at the time that we're remembering them. It's based on our amount of experience. It's based on our perceptions at the time. And I think there's something really freeing in that because it makes us that the emotional reality of our memories are not something we're stuck with, like, the events happened however they happened, and I think we also have to say, "These were my memories," and I also got some confidence in, like, that she remembered the way she remembered it because that's the way she remembered it, but there's such freedom in saying, "Wait a second, this is not necessarily it, and my emotional reality is not anchored in this, and I can change that moving forward." My perspective.
Yes, absolutely. Is that what surprised you most about meeting your 10-year-old self, or was there something else?
Well, I think that when I first reacquainted myself with her, and this sounds so like cheesy almost, but I like stuck myself in a hotel for a weekend and watched videos. We had those 8 millimeter films that my mom got put on a VCR and I watched that and I had all the photo albums and I was like, oh my God, she's crazy. Because I should have been like on some kind of medication. I was like, dancing around, like, full of mirth, the bowl cut on full display, and I did not care. I was very clear I did not care when anybody else saw it, and I wasn't really fitting into the box completely, and, I was really frustrated. I was, like, completely alarmed with myself. I was like, "Hold on, get control of yourself. Like, this is going to be hard moving forward if you cannot just fit in with everyone else." And so I was just complete, and this is really in the narrative of the book, you can tell I'm like, "Wait a second," and because that was real as I wrote it. But by the end, I wanted to get away from her, not just in writing the book, but I think in my own head and heart. And by the end, I was like, "Wait a second. We lived some of the best parts of this little kid and ourselves away, with the rest of our lives." And I went from wanting to run away from her when I started writing the book to wanting to be her and honor her for the rest of my life when I was done writing the book. And that was shocking to me completely.
Oh, I bet. It's so funny, and I started actually thinking about myself when I was 10, and it just seems like obviously a simpler time, of course, but it's so interesting to look back. I think of what my hair looked like when I was 10. Not good.
100%. Yeah.
But yeah, you learned so much from it, and as you said, the perspective, that is so intriguing to me because when you're 10 years old, you look at the world much differently than at almost 40 years old for myself, so
Right.
it's interesting to look back and see how you grew just, personality-wise and,
Right.
now you're this author, and did you ever see yourself being an author?
No, that was a dream, like, that would have been something I written down as a dream for me, and it would have been a dream for little Amy, and I think about all the time, if little Amy could see what had happened, she'd be like, "Yeah." I mean, that's awesome, you know, and I
Oh,
think that that reconnection, I found things about myself that I was like, "Wait a second, these are things that that I can do, we can do." I see her as a separate person almost just because of the book project, but there's things that I realized in myself that I had forgotten about, and it was very freeing, and also, I think it changed the trajectory of my life, reacquainting myself with her.
absolutely. So we were discussing your humor because you do it so well. Do you trust humor to carry some serious meaning? We kind of touched on this a little bit. Or do you ever worry it will soften the blow too much?
Well, I think it's a very delicate balance. Plus, humor has it absolutely has the capability of, being hurtful, or making fun of something that shouldn't be made fun of. I don't know inappropriate's the right word or not. So humor's a very delicate balance, and the good thing about writing humor is you can go back and change it if it goes too far, and having an editor, you can have be in check with that. Again, when I reread the book, I think that's one of the things I'm most proud of is it is genuinely funny, and I feel like between myself and my editor that we got a pretty good, and the publisher, we got a pretty good balance of not getting it right, because I, like everyone else, like you have written a book, gets feedback from people about stuff they don't like, and the humor's part of that. But I feel like that balance is done pretty well, and I think the humor is a natural gift for me because I don't know how it works, it just happens, I guess. I'm not blowing smoke up my own rear end, I'm just saying I think that's something that I got, and, that it works, and so therefore I'm proud of that, of the ability to make people laugh.
Okay. Let's pivot over to Dear Dana now because that is the one that I've been recently reading and I love it. I think that the story of how it came about is the most interesting part of it too because you said that you wrote 580
Mhm.
letters
Right.
on Facebook, right?
Handwritten letters to my
Oh,
Facebook
handwritten.
friends.
Oh,
Yeah, they
okay.
were all handwritten, and it happened just completely not by accident, I mean, by design, in my opinion. I mean, you can frame it however you want to, but I was literally minding my own business, and I was not like, "Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna become the letter writing lady," because that would be a great stick, like, I could really sell that, and I did not at all, and now I'm literally in the position where I cannot keep up with talking to people about handwritten letters and notes and the power that has in the world of AI that we live in.
Yes. That
So
has convoluted a lot of it.
right, and it just, and the thing is the story happened on accident because basically I was on Facebook minding my own business. I reconnected with this camp friend. I had grown up at a summer camp, and we had been counselors for like 6 weeks together, and that all I really remember is we were both loud and thought we were funny, and so she'd always, how you have people who just kind of float around in your head for the rest of your life, but we'd had no connection in like 30 something years. I saw her on Facebook, I friended her, she accepted, I mean, you don't really have to do anything else, so that seemed good. And then I scrolled through her life, and it's funny what you said about hair earlier because I was like, "Wait, her hair changed." Like, she had brown, like, perm hair in the '80s, and then it was, like, straight and blonde. I was like, "What happened?" She found keratin. So it's a miracle. Let's all rejoice in the streets. But so I found out right away that she had 5 kids, and she had 1 son, the youngest, and he had cancer, and it was serious. And I was like, "Oh my gosh," as a mom, as a human being, I was like, "This is terrible." And so he goes in remission, he relapses. I sit down at my desk after she shares this. We still have no contact. I'm not hitting like or commenting because she's her kid's sick. I mean, what she don't even know who I am. Like that's disingenuous. So I sit down at my desk. I'm like, it was like a lightning bolt hit me in the head. I'm gonna start writing these two every day and send these letters to the Ronald McDonald House in Memphis because that's where they were. And I had no intention beyond that. And I kind of thought it was crazy, but so I started writing them, dear Dana, dear Parker, every week for about 14 weeks, and just say like, I'm praying for you, I'm thinking about you, all those things you would say in that note. And then, unthinkably, this kid loses his battle with cancer and he passes away. And I'm like, this has nothing to do with me, but I cannot just leave this girl hanging. Like, I write all these letters and tell her how I'm supporting her. And then she goes home with the worst possible scenario any of us can imagine. And I'm like, I can't just stop writing. And I'm like, this is nuts. But so I kind of stalk her husband's law office address because I didn't know her home address. And again, I wasn't going to ask her that. Like, here I am, stranger. And so I start writing her there. And then eventually, after like 4 or 5 months of this, and me telling myself I'm crazy the whole time, and these letters expand into longer and longer letters, she starts writing me back. And so we spent 2 years just writing in the US mail. That's all the contact we have. But she starts sharing about her grief. I start looking at my life from the outside in, and it kind of changed the way I looked at everything. I'm like, here's this random girl from Facebook, and we're having this very, like, we used to say stuff like, oh, I know I haven't ever told anybody this, but I know I can trust you, stranger, add a letter. But it created this intimate free space where no one knew who was reading what when. And we just opened up. And I was like, so if this goodness can happen from this one random girl with the keratin, like, what about everyone else? And so I was like, "Well, I'm gonna try to write everybody." And so I got stationery and I got a box, put everybody's names in it, and I got a journal. But I really thought I'd get to like letter 27 because that's craziness. But once I got to letter 27, I was like, "Wait a second. This has unleashed the most good in my life I ever had." There's so much power in doing this. People responded in such an emotional way, and it just changed me. And so I was like, "I'm gonna do everyone." So it took me 18 months and I wrote 580 handwritten letters to my Facebook friends. I wrote a book about it. I have 3 speeches about it, and it just changed my entire life.
I love that. And I bet it was touching because we live in a society now where communication is so impersonal. To have that handwritten, even if it's somebody I haven't spoken to in years, it's still, it would make your day to know that someone spent their time, trying to connect with you. I love that.
Well, no, it blew the doors off people, and that's the thing that shocked me over and over again. And the letters were nice for sure, and some of them were funny. If you think about trying to reconnect with all those people on that list, it's going to get awkward and interesting. And I kept telling myself over and over again, just like the letters to Dana, like, why am I doing this? Like, this is awkward and kind of weird, but people responded so dramatically. And here's why: because social media is so great because it connects us to more people, but we obviously feel isolated because of it. But when someone reaches out to you individually and then takes time, sacrifices some kind of resources just for you, then all of a sudden you have this moment at the mailbox where you're holding something in your hand that your friend held in their hands just for you. People they like, if you send me a letter, and I know this because I've experienced it hundreds of times. They're going to be like, wait a second. She had to sit down, find an envelope. She had to write something down on her pen. Oh, my hand hurts now. Then she had to find my address. Then she had to put a stamp on it. Who has a stamp? Then she has to go across town and mail it. And then you hold that thing in your hand. You're like, wait a second. This is how much I matter to another human being. And it's like, bam. So in this world where we're all in this group together, which is great, we individually matter that much to another human being. And it absolutely touched people in a way. And I tell people this all the time, less me sending you $100 in the mail, there's really nothing that can beat this. It is so powerful. It is off the chain good.
It is powerful. I love that. That is one of my favorite stories I've heard on Pod's Radio so far. I love that. That is so we need more of that in our lives, you know?
Right. And speaking of the plot twist, which is, The plot twist is, Aaron, the person who walks away the most from writing handwritten notes or letters to other people is the person who writes them. Because, not only does it release these endorphins, the act of writing has scientific proof that it improves your mental health, but you get to provide someone else hope. If you do it on a daily or weekly basis, it's a reminder that we're all connected for a reason that transcends all the differences that separate us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. I only have one last question for you, and then I'll let you go. But Plot Twist Radio is about the moments that quietly reroute a life. Looking back, what's a moment that didn't feel important at the time, but turned out to change everything?
I think for me right now, it's the moment that I decided to start writing Dana, even though that didn't seem like a big deal. And I think especially after her son passed away, I kept telling myself, there is not one thing you can do for this person who lost her son, much less write about your life in a card with notebook paper shaved in it. Oh, and I'll never forget. And this is not, again, I'm not blowing smoke here, but this story was so powerful. Dana and we ended up being best friends. We ended up on the Kelly Clarkson show. Dana was telling Kelly Clarkson our story, like live, but the TV audience, all the people were there. And she said something to me she never said to Kelly Clarkson. She said, my family and I, we would wait for those letters every week. Every week we were holding on for her letters. And I remember thinking, I hope my mouth was not wide open on the Kelly Clarkson show, but I remember thinking, if that one moment where I sat there in my office in my house and wrote those words, I would have never imagined, not that I would have been on the Kelly Clarkson show, but those people would have been hanging on for those letters because it gave them so much hope every 7 days when they were suffering the worst thing any of us can think of. So I tell people all the time that one small voice, that stupid idea you come up with, we could just believe in ourselves. And it's not about writing letters, for just enough to take one step forward. I literally think we would change the world.
I agree. I agree. That's such a sweet story. I mean, it's heartbreaking, but sweet at the same time that you were there for the family during that time because I couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine what they were going through. So
Right. And if that moved the needle at all, it's just unbelievable. But that's where, again, our intuition and the things we think we should do, we probably should do them
abs-
immediately.
absolutely trust in yourself. Where can the listeners find you on Amazon, social media?
Right, and really the best way is to start with, my website, amydaughters.com. The books are there, my email address there. I'd love to connect with anyone who's listened to anything we've talked about, and also my mailing address is there. So if you wanna write me a note, I'll write you back, but, that's all things, and the books are available everywhere. I like small bookstores, so bookshop.org, if you don't have a bookstore, supports, bookstores, the dying breed of bookstores in America, so
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It has been wonderful listening to your story. I've loved it.
well, thank you, Aaron. It's a real pleasure and honor to be on your podcast. Thank you.
And that was my conversation with Amy Weinland Daughters. And honestly, it was one of those interviews that lingers with you long after the mic is off. Amy's work reminds us that memory isn't fixed, family stories aren't static, and the way we tell our own story can quietly reshape how we live it. You don't need a time machine to revisit the past. You just need the courage to look again, with a little more compassion and a little more honesty. You can find Amy's books, Dear Dana and You Cannot Mess This Up, wherever books are sold, and I highly recommend both. One will make you laugh, the other may make you write a letter you didn't know you needed to send. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow Plot Twist Radio, leave a review, and share it with someone who loves stories that bend time and tell the truth sideways. Until next time, remember, sometimes the biggest plot twist isn't changing the story, it's realizing you were always allowed to tell it.